Story 1. Sweet Pea Perfume. I had one of those cheap, watered-down kid perfumes when I was little, and I loved it. I thought it smelled like what fairies must smell like. Story 2. The smell of a just-lit cigarette I find comforting. My mom and grandma both smoked when I was growing up, and it still calms me. I've never smoked, and it's only that very first light. Story 3. Hawkins cheesies immediately send me back to going to the gun range with my dad as a kid. Such vivid and powerful memories that I'm half convinced if I ever smelled Hawkins, gun oil, and discharged gunpowder at the same time, I might actually just teleport back in time. Story 4. Electric pencil sharpeners, erasers, expo markers, Elmer's glue, freshly printed paper from the copy machines, gumballs, old coins, dollar bills, ice cream shops, McDonald's, sour candy, movie popcorn, roast beef, new shoes still in the box, SpaghettiOs, Chef Boyardee, oceans, surfboard wax, sand and dirt, grass being mowed, gasoline, charcoal grill, stale cigarette smoke, freshly cut wood, hardware stores, Abercrombie, Noli perfume, eyeliner pencils, sunscreen, magazines, books, dust, mold, cats, schools and cafeterias, baseballs, tennis balls, basketballs, footballs, bicycle tires, window air conditioning units, corner stores, chlorinated pools, firewood, Subway, shoe stores, mall food courts, IHOP, VHS tapes, deep freezers, garages, Folgers, Lifesaver mints, sea salt Laffy Taffy, dirty bong water, scented markers, old carpet, ponds, snakes, raked leaves, pecans, hot cocoa, marshmallows. Story 5. French fries being made. We came over from India and walked by a shop cooking French fries. That smell is ingrained in my brain, and every time I smell it, I remember New York. Story 6. The smell of tomato sauce from the not-so-good pizza my maternal grandmother made twice before she died. Even though it was bad, I think I wanted to eat it again. Story 7. The hospital and shots. My mom worked at a hospital overnight, and when she came back, she would smell like it. Now it's a comforting smell because it reminds me of my mom. Story 8. Homemade biscuits and freshly baked apple pie remind me of my grandmother, who was the greatest cook I've ever had the privilege to eat from. Tyler candles remind me of my mom. She's still around, but I haven't been home in a few years, and she used to burn those apple spice or vanilla candles. Vanilla-scented tree car fresheners remind me of my stepdad's old farm truck. Fire-cured tobacco reminds me of the days on the farm as a kid. The smell of old books reminds me of going to the library in school back in the day. Sulfur reminds me of the smell of the water at my paternal grandparents' house. Awful smell, but still nostalgic. Story 9. Anybody remember those foam bath toys? I do, and every once in a while, I'll get a whiff of something that smells just like it, and I'm instantly transported back to fun bath time. Story 10. The smell of stale cigarette smoke in a car is odd. Yes, but it reminds me of being a child going on days out with my grandma. Damn, she was a good woman who loved to smoke. Story 11. 1. Cherry pipe tobacco. My grandpa smoked it. Car grease, oil, hot acid. My family owned an auto parts store and repair shop. I spent all day, every day playing in the back, running up and down aisles of exhaust pipes hanging from the ceiling. The mechanics would dangle me over the hot tank and threaten to dunk me if I did not stop. No, this was not considered abusive in 1966. Story 12. My mom had a friend who was an Avon lady. Once, the lady gave me her old box of perfume samples. They were all in little plain bottles. One of them was a rose scent, and every now and then I'll walk past some roses that have the exact smell from the bottle, and I'm instantly 7 years old again. Story 13. Smell of tape and Christmas wrapping paper. The sound of the scissors gliding through in a sweet motion. Also, the smell before a severe summer thunderstorm with the cold front coming before the rain. Story 14. Books, because my mom was an elementary school librarian. And the smell of a school on the first day when everyone has new supplies. So everything smells of Elmer's glue and crayons. Story 15. There's a certain plum that has a distinct aroma. My grandparents had a plum tree in their backyard. I visited them twice, but when I get that specific type of plum, I'm transported. Story 16. Sea air and bacon frying used to take me back to holidays on the coast because that was the only time as a family that we sat and had a full English cooked breakfast together in the hotel. We used to get up with my dad and go buy a newspaper, but not from a shop. A man used the huge grassy area outside the hotel on a cliff top overlooking the sea, with piles of different newspapers and a large stone on top of each to stop them from blowing away. Then, when we opened the door to the hotel, the smell of breakfast cooking was such a luxury to us. Story 17, Mothballs. Grandma's house used to always smell like it. Anytime I smell naphthalene, I am instantly reminded of my grandmother's home, where I spent many holidays. Grandmother also had 1970s wooden paneling and that classic couch pattern. Story 18, my grandma's Native American cigarettes. I've never smoked, but that smell is something I have only experienced when I was with her or on a reservation. It instantly reminds me of her. Story 19, cream soda. Coffee beans roasting. The bakers with wasps crawling scarily over the iced buns, cottage loaves, and singed raisins on fruit bread. Butchers with hanging meat and sawdust on the floor, and fishmongers with pints of red prawns. Tobacconists with exotic pipe tobaccos and fresh Turkish delight smelling gently of rose and pistachio. The Italian cafe with its whooshing coffee machine. The steamy fresh smell of the laundrette. The chemical smell of the dry cleaners, as you walked past on your way home from school. Story 20, wild garlic. My grandmother had it all along the edge of her garden. We would smell it while we were playing as kids. There was also the smell of my granddad's shed. I have only smelled that smell once since, but I know it when it hits me. Story 21, sawdust. My dad was a carpenter, so his clothes, his truck, and the garage always smelled like sawdust. It reminds me of better times now. I ended up stealing his old work flannel after he stopped carpentry because it still has the smell, although very faint. Story 22. I inherited an old shoebox with shoe polish from my grandfather. There is a piece of cloth in it with his smell. Once in a while, I take it out just to remember the days of being with him and my grandmother, playing board games and eating hamburgers. We were so happy back then. I miss them very much. Story 23. I was adopted by relatives of my mother, and whenever I got sick as a child, I could smell this weird fragrance, like my brain added a scent whenever I was ill. I knew I was getting the flu or something because I started to notice the smell. In my early 30s, when I came back from Afghanistan, I left the military and lived with my birth mother, and I smelled that same scent. It was literally her smell. Story 24. I love the smell of cottonwood trees. There was a huge one right outside my bedroom window when I was young, and I used to fall asleep with the smell of their white fluff in the air. They are hard to find around here, but there is a park with a few of them, and sometimes I go there just to smell them. Even the smell of a small stick from the tree brings back such great memories. Story 25. There is a certain way a trash can smell, and it takes me right back to my grandma's house as a kid when I would open the lid on her kitchen garbage. Story 26. Deep and Dish McCain double chocolate cake. I remember having one of these to myself after school in the back seat of the broken-down car at the side of my house. Story 27. I don't know what the smell actually was, but I can describe it as cinnamon marshmallows. A sweet, cinnamon-y smell that I found at Disneyland when I was 4 years old. I've been chasing it ever since. Story 28. Fresh horse manure. Reminds me of summer camp, where I would volunteer to shovel the horse stalls for an extra hour of riding. Quiet work in isolation with just horses around. It was nice in itself, albeit tiring, and I got to ride around the trails, then afterward dive into the lake. Story 29. I was at the orthodontist this week to remove a bonded retainer I have had for 21 years. Since I got my braces off when I was 14, they had to grind off the cement, and the smell of it brought me right back. Definitely unlocked some core memories. Story 30. To be honest, the smell of my dad's cigarettes. It's gross to think about after knowing how unhealthy it is, but it reminds me of the days when my dad was younger and would throw a baseball with me while a cigarette hung from his lip. Good times. Story 31. The smell of an Asian market. I grew up just off the strip in Vegas, and we used to frequent the nearby Chinatown and its market. It has a distinctive smell shared by other markets of its type that really brings back memories. Story 32. The smell of stale cigarettes and beer. My grandparents ran public houses and nightclubs, and I spent many school holidays playing there when they were closed in the mornings. The cleaners' kids and I would have the run of the dance floors and other areas. But that smell takes me right back. Story 33. Windex. On the first warm day of spring, my mom would wipe down all of the windows and open them to let the fresh air in. To this day, it is a nostalgic smell for me. Story 34. Opening the ice cream freezer at the grocery store. My dad delivered milk when I was 3 or 4 years old, and I remember tagging along with him every now and then. Sometimes when I'm grocery shopping, I'll go over there just to open the door and catch a whiff. Instant flashback. Story 35. Victoria's Secret Spray Perfume. Pink. I haven't smelled it since the early 2000s, but I thought I smelled it on the street the other day and it brought me instantly back to being a teenager. Then it made me sad. Story 36. There's a very distinct vanilla-scented candle that I've only come across a few times in my adult life. A shop where my mom worked when I was very young stocked it. Story 37. I can't. My grandmother had the Avon perfumes, so I don't know which one it was, but whenever I smell a certain flowery perfume that is thankfully not in circulation anymore, I tear up a bit. She also had a Christmas candle tin that only came out after Thanksgiving but was never lit. It just sat there. After she passed, it was one of the few things that I kept. I put it out for several years without lighting it. Finally, I said goodbye by lighting the candle. It smelled of elderberries. I'm not sure she'd appreciate the sentiment, but she was a fan of farcical humor, so I figured it was appropriate. Also, bacon because Saturday mornings were for breakfast and cartoons, and I still hold that close. Story 38. It's tar for me. My dad used to be the ship's engineer aboard square riggers, pirate ships basically, and I would live with him on the boats on the weekends. The decking was all sealed with tar, and it had an extremely thick smell. I'm transported back to that time whenever I catch even a whiff of it. Story 39. My grandma would always wet paper towels to wipe our faces after eating when she babysat my sister and me. The smell of wet paper towels is so weird to have that bring back memories, but it does. Story 40. Chlorine, corn dogs, one of my mom's perfumes, Play-Doh, crayons, cherry cough syrup, freshly installed carpet. I moved a lot as a kid. Does anyone else know what I mean with the old box televisions from the early 2000s and how the static they made almost had an electric smell? Please tell me I'm not the only one. Story 41. My mom had a fur coat when I was a kid in the 1970s. It must have been a birthday or Christmas gift because we were not well off. In Scotland, it rains a lot. She would only wear it when going for a night out, usually a Saturday night, and often I would be home with a sitter. But if they didn't get home too late, I would sneak into the living room when they got home, just before the sitter left, and snuggle into the wet fur coat. I do think that I will buy a fur coat, secondhand, at some point, just for that smell, but I think I will have to pretend it is fake if anyone were to ask, as fur coats, even secondhand ones, are very frowned upon these days. Story 42. About 20 years ago, I bought a special edition album by my favorite band on a CD. The case had a unique fold-out cardboard design, and the disc was secured with a tiny circle of dense foam that the disc was pushed onto. The adhesive used to secure the foam smelled exactly like a newly opened He-Man figure. I assume it was the adhesive. Totally blew my mind. Story 43. Jet fuel. My dad is a retired Navy fighter pilot. He had to be away for 8-month-long deployments. We missed him and worried about him tremendously. When his deployment was over, we all used to excitedly wait in a military aircraft hangar for his squadron to fly in from the aircraft carrier. We would impatiently watch them all land. It was so loud. Then my dad would climb out of his big fancy F-14, quickly walk over to us, immediately pick me up, and give me the biggest bear hug. He would finally be home safe again. Some of the happiest days of my childhood smelled like jet fuel. Story 44. Verbena. My grandmother had a verbena bush in her backyard. Unsuspecting me as a child decided to shove my nose in and promptly got stung by a bee in the cheek. Story 45. Diesel fuel. My late dad was a truck driver. He used to deliver fuel. When he came home, I could smell it on him. When I smell it now, it takes me back immediately. Story 46. Pipe tobacco smoke. My grandfather would sit there in his workshop with me on the floor, making Littlewood toys for us while puffing on it, and 36 years later, I still have that jump back to childhood memory moment every time I smell it. Story 47. Cut grass. Smell after summer shower. The fall leaves. That salty smell shoulder pads and helmet have the next day after practice. Concrete and rusted lockers in the locker room. Story 48. The smell of cashmere bouquet after every bath at my grandma's house. This was the powder on her shelf. When I used it, the smell of the powder and the warmth of my flannel nightgown combined with the clean, afterbath comfort to make me feel safe and comforted. Although I still love the smell, the combination of those sensations in that place is a special and unique memory. Story 49. Bowling alley smell. Whenever I go in one, I think back instantly to 5th and 6th grade bowling league on Saturday morning. Sweet Child O' Mine by Guns N' Roses does the same thing. Good times. Story 50. Something that smelled like minty sawdust was used to clean up vomit in elementary school. That smell immediately returns me to being 7 and experiencing the class-wide buzz and excitement of someone threw up in class. Story 51. Axle grease. My dad worked in a heavy equipment shop, and visiting him at work was one of the few places where I would see him sober and proud of what he was doing. Story 52. Hot pine needles. Let me explain. I'm from Australia, so Christmas happens in summer. When I was a kid, we'd always get a freshly cut Christmas tree from the local scouts. We didn't have air conditioning or anything, so for several weeks every summer, the house was filled with the smell of a very hot pine tree. Decades later, I walked into a building that had a big Christmas tree in the foyer and was met with the same smell. Suddenly, I was 6 again. It was super weird.